feel that they understand the weight of the shirt on their shoulders, and also the privileged position that they're in to be playing, for example, at Wembley, when their sort of similar age soldiers are fighting on the front line.
In the final weeks of February last year, Ukraine was changed forever as Russia began an illegal invasion of a sovereign country. Almost 13 months later, the war continues, but Ukrainian football is trying to recover. Back in August, Shakhtar Donetsk and Metalist Kharkiv played out a 0-0 draw in a behind-closed-doors match on the outskirts of Kyiv. Ukrainian President Zelensky encouraged a restart as a morale-boosting sign of defiance. Shakhtar has played in the Champions League this season, and the top-flight campaign is set to be completed by this summer. Top Ukrainian talents such as Mykhalo Mudryk have also moved to the Premier League. On the international stage, Ukraine continued to participate in World Cup qualifications, emotionally beating Scotland away 4 months after the invasion. And although they lost the final round of qualification to Wales, they approached this weekend with the aim of qualifying for the 2024 European Championships in Germany, facing England at Wembley Stadium on Sunday. We caught up with Andrew Todos, a Ukrainian football expert and podcast host, to reflect on the last year of how Ukrainian football has responded.
I think it's very important, in honesty. It's actually Ukraine's first game in 6 months, because they didn't make the World Cup, which was seen as a massive disappointment. Maybe not through Ukraine's own performances, but just because of how they went out against Wales, the own goal, Wayne Hennessy masterclass, and then seeing how Wales actually performed at the World Cup, it was like, oh God, we possibly could have done better than that. And then after that, the Nations League campaign followed, and that was also underwhelming because Ukraine didn't get promotion back to League A, they're staying in League B. And in general, it was a disappointing year for football on the pitch for the team, but also amidst the backdrop of everything that's going on with the war and the invasion, and sort of hearing daily all the problems that you get, where literally this week there's been another shelling of an apartment block just where people are living, and a few people have died. So it's that kind of stuff that I think the team are very conscious of and want to ensure that people back home can have some positive emotions, be it for 90 minutes. And obviously, on top of that, this is the first game of the qualifying cycle. So start as you mean to go on, really, and try and hopefully get a positive result of any kind will sort of set you up for the remainder of the tournament, because it's obviously this game probably is on par with the Italy away match for Ukraine. So as the hardest games in the group, so it's going to be tough. But Ruslan Rotan, the new Ukraine manager, the caretaker manager, he had a press conference this week at Brentford's training ground. He said literally, we've got it tough. It's not easy, but it's sort of nowhere near as tough as people fighting on the front lines and all that. So it all pales in comparison. And I think that with about 4.5k Ukraine fans in the stadium in a sold-out Wembley, it should be a great occasion.
Talking there about sort of kind of the mood in the camp, I mean, sort of you cast your minds back to over a year ago now. I think it's almost 13 months since the invasion happened, or at least I distinctly remember that Saturday, I think it was, where Everton played Man City, and you had Mykolenko on one side, Zinchenko on the other, and I think both of them were in tears. And I just wanted to ask you about sort of the impact it's had on those players.
So I was at that game, Everton Man City. I had it booked way before because it was going to be a derby between two Ukrainians, and yeah, it was an emotional game. And I mean, I feel that match sort of symbolised exactly what you were saying there in terms of how Ukrainian players abroad reacted to it, well, to the situation back home in a wider context. The majority of them, more or less daily, share some kind of story about the war on their Instagrams. They're countless, the ones especially in the wealthier leagues, have been donating like thousands of pounds of donations to multiple charities, to the army, and other kind of similar initiatives. And Alexander Zinchenko, he's very engaged with that. He's even got like his own charity himself. It's called like Football for Ukraine, where he's like trying to raise money through football for something like that. And there was that rumour that Chelsea and Arsenal might play a friendly this summer in in regards to that charity. So that would be interesting to see if anything's followed up regarding that. But it has been tough. That's the thing. I feel that it might even be a bit tougher for those abroad because they don't know. They obviously have got experience of like their family members and everything else over there, but the fact that they've sort of maybe not lived through it as closely as their compatriots and teammates, because in the Ukraine squad, I guess a slight majority play in Ukraine still. So a lot of them were, especially in Ukraine for the first month and a half, when the bombardment of Kyiv and everything was happening. So they know, airstrikes, sirens, and everything. That is sort of the new normality. Whereas those playing abroad, maybe slightly maybe slightly detached more from that, because it's just not been a sort of a first-hand thing. But I think it's very much impacted them anyway, because, a lot of them, I'm sure, maybe not homesick, but very upset and depressed from everything that was going on. Andriy Yarmolenko, when he was playing for West Ham, especially in those first few weeks, I think his wife returned to Ukraine like a couple of days before the war broke out fully. And he was said that he couldn't sleep or eat for like a week or so until they sort of got to safety back in Poland and returned to London. So it has had a detrimental effect on them. But I feel that over the past year, as with more or less all Ukrainians, be it the ones that live in Ukraine and abroad, everyone's become a bit seasoned and a bit weathered in it. So whilst it is very upsetting and distressing every time, people know how to cope with it a bit better emotionally and psychologically and even physically. So when they sort of step out on the pitch, for example, at Wembley on Sunday, they should be able to at least cast that aside, all that sort of mental troubles that they may have or anything, and just focus on the football for 90 minutes, like they did against Scotland in that first playoff semi-final.
As sort of harrowing and horrific as it has been, not only for the players abroad, the players domestically, and of course their families and the people of Ukraine, do you sense, I think you were at the Brentford training ground this week to sort of see them train, do you get a sense that, I hate to kind of frame it in a way that it's a positive, because it's obviously not a positive, but in a sense of a team bond has been there with especially the Scotland game you referenced there is something that comes to mind of that team coming together in what is a really, really challenging moment. Has it created a stronger bond between the squad, the players, the coach, kind of a pride in playing international football that maybe wasn't there before?
To be honest, I'd say yes. As far as I'm aware, when you go to these open training sessions, you only get the first 15 minutes, but, the players are joking around. They're not obviously going to be sad 100% of the day or whatever, but joking around, taking it seriously, focused. They seem to be in a good mood. I think there's great atmosphere in the camp at the moment in terms of just, rapport between everyone. And yeah, I'd agree with the fact that I'd say that the team's become a lot more patriotic over the past year. That's for certain. And that can be said for the majority of the country, to be honest. And it's just sort of transcended into the national team as well, where in the past, due to the Soviet legacy of, the Soviet Union, football and sport usually was like this thing played by, the elites and all that kind of stuff. And when you were an elite in the Soviet Union, you'd only speak Russian. And as a result, sort of the lingua franca of sport and football, for that matter, was sort of Russian. And even when players did interviews and things, it was always in Russian. Whereas now, there's been a market shift, more or less the majority of the squad, when they're doing media engagements or whatever, they're speaking in Ukrainian. I feel that they understand the weight of the shirt on their shoulders, and also the privileged position that they're in to be playing, for example, at Wembley, when their sort of similar age soldiers are fighting on the front line. So it's something that they sort of take pride in. And Ruslan Rotan, the manager, he made that sort of very clear that we're very proud to be playing in this game, and we just want to give the country a bit of respite from the sort of the daily bombardments and horrors that they sort of go through, and maybe bring some positivity to them, be it for 90 minutes or or a bit longer.
I mean, how do you think, maybe from a fan perspective, has this been? Because I was sort of thinking it from a UK perspective, obviously very different, but you have the COVID pandemic, which means that fans can't go inside the ground, and obviously that would have been similar in Ukraine. And then you come back to football for what probably was about 5 or 6 months, and then it gets cancelled again. I mean, it must have been such a unique experience in so many ways, but just focusing on, say, the football fan in Ukraine who wants to support their local team, it must have been it's been a bizarre few years, hasn't it?
No, absolutely. I feel that, they've really had a tough time in terms of just from a sporting context, because they can't go to the grounds. Fortunately, you can watch all the games on TV or streaming services, so that's not actually as problematic. Well, it was the same in COVID here, even so, when they made everything available because nobody could go in. So people can still watch games, and that it's just the atmosphere and living the match day experience that people are lacking. And I'm sure that the irony of it all is that not that many people actually went to games even prior to COVID, because since 2014, when the war began in the east of Ukraine, when Russia first invaded and took Crimea as well, that was when the sort of socioeconomic, I guess, levels of the country started to drop pretty drastically, and football dropped as well. Some of the big teams folded. That was actually nothing to do with the war. It's just to do with like oligarch owners who didn't want to fund the teams anymore and just pulled the plug, and stuff like FC Dnipro and FC Metalist, who were regulars on the sort of Europa League scene. And what happened was it just sort of created a bit of a decline in going to the stadium, like that sort of football culture from the highs of Euro 2012 and those sort of heyday years of the early 2010s when Ukrainian football when Ukrainian football clubs were in Europe like every season and playing really well. And now what's ironic is that literally over the past couple of years, during COVID and stuff, and then once fans were allowed to be back in for a bit, football seemed to be going on the rise again. Like, for example, last January, in January 2022, Shakhtar Donetsk signed David Neres. And they were like, they were meant that was going to be big business and he would have been a great player and an addition to the Ukrainian Premier League. However, he never actually played a game for them because the war broke out in February. The league was meant to resume on the 26th of February, but the war broke out on the 24th. So he never actually played a game and left for Benfica. And we're seeing sort of what he's doing over there. So now the quality of football has dropped a lot because a lot of the foreign players have left. So the foreign players that Ukraine can still attract is of a lesser quality than it used to be. Yeah, you still get some uncut gems or something like that in terms of foreign players, but now it's sort of very much a big focus on Ukrainian talent because that's what makes up the majority. And I feel that once the war comes to an end, once Ukraine win, then football will be valued a lot more than it was. And I feel that there will be a lot of initiatives to get people back in grounds, to get them experience. And the fact that they've missed it for so long, people will be like, hey, I actually do want to go and see my local team and that kind of stuff. So fingers crossed that comes sooner rather than later. But I'm positive about that once obviously the war situation becomes more positive as well.
Can you see Ukraine qualifying for 2024?
Yeah, so it's going to be a difficult group. That's 100% certain. The fact that the top two teams qualify and Ukraine already got England and Italy in the same group, regardless of Italy not doing too well in qualifying in recent tournaments, they somehow have got this knack of doing okay in the Euro qualifying. So that's not too good. Ukraine and England matchups in qualifiers are usually a lot tighter as well. So I'm holding out on something like that. And fingers crossed that the likes of, Mykhalo Mudryk, who's maybe not hit the ground running at Chelsea just yet, can put on a bit of a performance with the extra motivation of playing at Wembley, knowing that a lot of English eyes will be on him. And there's plenty of other talents that could be unearthed in the Ukraine squad from some of that Shakhtar team and some of the other talents. Obviously, Alexander Zinchenko, big potential for him to walk out as captain on Sunday because Andriy Yarmolenko's got a bit of an injury, so he's touch and go whether he'll even start. And I guess it's a new era, sort of a transition era because of the caretaker manager role, but still, I think, start as you mean to go on. And worst comes to worst, I think if you finish third, there's a high potential that Ukraine, via sort of the Nations League route, due to sort of teams in those positions potentially qualifying automatically from the Euros, Ukraine actually making it to through the playoffs. So there's fallback options and everything. I am currently none the wiser how Ukraine are going to play on Sunday because of the brand new manager. He likes switching up with the different teams that he's currently managing. He's actually managing three sides simultaneously at the moment. He's the Ukraine under-21 manager. He's also a UPL side manager, so FC Alexandria manager, and now he's the caretaker manager here. So will be interesting. Some of the early interviews that I've seen from the players that have just taken it post-training, from the sort of in-house Ukrainian national team media saying, yeah, we're doing lots of tactical work. They're like out of breath and all this kind of stuff. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, multitasking, a new way of multitasking in football. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining me.
Daniel, nice one. Thank you.